part 2 of chapter 2, starting back right here on page 9. Okay. Sadri Ald shook her head. It had been some time since Alinea and Zedri had turned 15. Their time to be freed had come. If only she could find them. She and her husband Denon had been searching for the young twins for months now. Yet they were no closer to finding them than when they had first begun. Sadri was nearing defeat. When she and Denon had accepted the honor of freeing the children upon their 15th birthday, she had not expected the task to be so difficult. She and Denon were Eves after all. Should that not give them some sort of advantage? Apparently not. Anything new? She looked up from the desk in front of her. It was covered with maps of the Devon world. Her husband, Denon, stood in the study's doorway, watching her work. She frowned and shook her head. Where else is there to look? Denon joined her at the desk. We have yet to visit every section of Devon. She nodded as he leaned forward over the desk, his eyes scanning the maps she had just been poring over. What about that? He asked after a moment. Sadri glanced down at where he was pointing. Gwenon? Yes, his brow furrowed. It's only a few miles wide. It is the dwelling of one of the Lances, Sadri replied. It is his allotted land. Have we been there? If we have, I cannot remember it. Denon straightened. Then perhaps we should go and refresh our memory. Next part. I don't know how else to say that. Next part. Next part. Terry, get up. Terry recognized Dani's voice, but it took her a moment to realize what she had said. Terry groaned and rubbed her eyes with one hand. Why? Because it's morning, Dani retorted. We've got to get down to the kitchen as always. Terry groaned again. Just tell Hilda I'm sick. I've caught the sleeping sickness. She smiled. Hilda would like that one. I'm not covering for you again. Wait, Terry opened her eyes. Is today Thursday? No, Friday. Yes, Terry laughed and shut her eyes. I'm off today. Slaves were entitled 2 days a week as their own, as a break from their limitless chores. Dani stood from her bed and smoothed her dress with her hands, sighing. Lucky. Bye, Terry smiled as her friend followed the other slaves down to their individual assignments. A few moments later, the room was cleared out completely, leaving Terry alone. She loved Fridays. Out of the 11 slaves who shared her tower room, she was the only one to have Friday off, and she enjoyed every moment of her silence. Terry yawned, lowering herself back onto the foot of her bed. The new slave was still fast asleep on her pillow. She was contemplating getting into Dani's bed. Her night had been a rough one, tossing and turning for hours. It had only left her exhausted. Why didn't you have work today? Why didn't you have to work today? I missed the two. Terry leapt off the bed just as the new slave pushed himself up. He raised one hand. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. How long have you been awake? Long enough. Terry lowered her eyebrows and took in his features. She guessed he was around her age by the look of him. His hair was a light brown with slight highlights throughout. Terry assumed he got those from his hours in the sun as an Adarian. What really surprised her, though, were his eyes. They were a dark brown, same as hers. She had never seen anyone else with her eye color. She had figured herself to be the only one in Devon with brown eyes. My name's Teve, he smiled, revealing straight white teeth. I'm Terry, she replied. Orphans didn't have last names. Were you the one who helped me last night? His skin was tan. Terry envied him of the time he must have spent outside. She hated always being cooped up in the castle's kitchen. Yes, I was with Krenna. Who's Krenna? The servant's nurse. Her eyes moved from his face to his bare chest. He was much more muscular than she would have expected, but then he was an Adarian. How long have I been sleeping? Don't know. You've only been here at... She stopped mid-sentence as her eyes landed on his right shoulder. She gaped. There was no way he could be. What's wrong? He frowned. You. She took a step closer to him, her hand unconsciously raising, reaching out for his silver birthmark. In the other worlds, twins had matching birthmarks. Their marks came in many different shapes, but all the same color and in the same place. They were silver and sat on the shoulder, just below the neck. However, the birth order of a twin determined on which shoulder the mark was situated. On the left signified the elder twin. Teves was on his right, meaning he was younger. Terry rested one knee on her bed as her fingers brushed over Teves' skin. He blinked up at her. Have you never seen one before? No, Terry let out a short laugh. I've seen many a twin before. Then what's the matter? I've seen your mark before. She smiled slightly. I know who matches you. You know my twin? Teves' eyes widened. She nodded. Teve paused for a moment. Then, can I see yours? Teef slowly lifted his hand to pull at the neckline of her dress, revealing her shoulder to him. She laughed as his fingers slid over her mark, just as she had done to his. It's the same. He stared at her. You're my twin? She grinned. Nice to meet you, Teef. Next part. Forgive me, but where was it you said you were from? The lens had asked politely enough, but Sadri caught the distaste in her voice. Sadri forced a smile. I am from a place called Sivian, milady. Far from here? Very. Oh. The lens took another sip of her tea, giving Sadri enough time to look around the parlor. It was actually rather small. Sadri guessed this was the parlor the lens used to greet unimportant guests. It was on the darker side, having only one window and an unlit fireplace. Had it been lit, though, the room would have been sweltering. Devon summers were mild, but not cool enough for a fire during the day. So what brings you to Devon? The lens asked after a moment. Sadri set her teacup into its saucer. We may be interested in buying some of your slaves. Indeed, the lens tried to hide her surprise, but it was to be expected. In Devon, slaves were not sold. Although it was not unheard of, it was rarely done. It was simply easier to receive slaves as newly orphaned from the traders. Slaves in Devon served the same household they were taken to at the death of their parents until they claimed their freedom on their 17th birthday, the first day of adulthood. Indeed, milady. About 3 floors above Sadri's head, Denon was climbing up a particularly long stairwell, alongside the Lance de Capron and his steward. The Lance was informing Denon of his many noble siblings, without noticing the lack of interest from his companions on such a topic. They were on their way to another turret that served as the slaves' quarters. This was their second turret. The first had been devoid of any living soul. Denon frowned as he continued his flight, while the Lance droned on without the need to draw breath. At last, they reached the top of the stairs and entered the circular stone room through its open door. The chamber was surprisingly well lit. Light streamed down from long slits in the walls, located high above their heads near the ceiling. Upon their entrance, a pair of slaves at the far end of the room jumped to their feet. Denon furrowed his eyebrows. The boy and girl wore the dull gray garb of older slaves, but they did not drop their heads as the other slaves did when in the presence of their possessors. Was there a resemblance between the two, or was he imagining it? Excuse me, Lord, Denon interrupted the Lance mid-sentence. May I speak with your slaves? The Lance searched the empty room until his eyes landed on the pair. He blinked, as if surprised to see them, before turning to his steward. Call them to us. Steward. Called his steward. Call them to us. The steward motioned towards them, but instead of using Arthelian as the Lance had been, he ordered in Sardian, Come, slaves. The two began forward together after a moment's hesitation. When they reached the appropriate distance of 5 feet between slave and possessor, they dropped to their knees, as was required. Denon noticed them both clench their fists simultaneously. The steward stepped forward and cupped the girl's chin with his hand. This is Terry, he said. She is a fine scullery maid with a voice as lovely as her face. Denon watched as the girl gritted her teeth. The steward then turned his attention to the boy. The other is a new slave, traded from an Indarian clan. Denon nodded once. Thank you. I would like to question them in private. Very well, the Lance shrugged, laying his hands across his round belly. My steward and I will wait for you at the stairs. Denon waited for them to exit before he crouched down in front of them. He smiled and said the Devon greeting in Sardian. Fine weather on any day. The girls stared at him. He could have raised them to their feet, but instead he lowered himself to their level. You wish to speak with slaves, sir? Yes, Denon nodded. I'm searching for a set of twins. Do you happen to know any? The two exchanged glances. Then the boy answered, We're twins. Denon smiled. Would you mind showing me your birthmarks? The boy removed his tunic while the girl pulled down her neckline. Denon sank to his knees. There it was, the Balnorian knot, the ancient symbol that had once rallied entire worlds. Denon felt as if a massive burden had been suddenly lifted from his shoulders. The hope of the other worlds and heirs to the Caprith were kneeling before him. Denon unconsciously released a sigh of relief. Then, how would you like to be free? The girl blinked. What? Okay. There's just one more section. I hope Instagram will let me do it. Okay. Will Payton watched the rain hit the pond before his window. It'd been 3 months to the day. 3 months. Will ran a hand through his hair as the pain rose up again in his throat. 3 months ago, he had been fine with the way his life was going. 3 months ago, he'd been attending a great university on his way into medical school. His grades had been perfect. He'd just been accepted into his father's alma mater, the University of Southern California, in his beautiful home state. 3 months ago, he'd intended to start there the following fall, But then, 3 months ago, he still wanted to be a doctor. Will? He turned to find his great-grandfather's housekeeper standing in his bedroom's doorway. Yes, Millie? Come down to the kitchen, she said in her crisp British accent. I have made some sandwiches and warmed up some milk. Will straightened. I'll be down in a bit. Millie gave him a small smile. She was in her mid-30s and had young blue eyes. All right. He watched her leave, but didn't move for a moment. Truthfully, he wasn't at all hungry. Hadn't been for months now. If it were up to him, he wouldn't eat. But Millie had kept her eye on him since he had arrived. She was always making sure he ate something at the right hours. Will furrowed his eyebrows. He wondered if his great-grandfather had mentioned feeding him as a new duty for her. Will let his breath out in a rush. He took one last glance out the window at the rain and followed Millie to the kitchen. Once downstairs and fed, Will moved his attention outside. Still remaining in the kitchen nook of his new home, he felt bored, but didn't have the drive to find something to do. From his seat at the table, he peered out into the woods behind the house. They drew his attention, as if offering him sanctuary amid their quiet expanse. He might go out once it stopped raining. One plus about living in the country was that no one was ever around to bother you. I see you fancy my woods. Okay, that's Will's great-grandfather, and imagine a British accent. I don't want to show you my attempt of a British accent, but pretend you can hear it in your head. I see you fancy my woods. Will turned as his great-grandfather, Trenton Ulrich, sat down across from him. He hadn't heard him enter the kitchen. Well, lad, Trenton watched him expectantly. The trees look old, Will finally said. That's because they are old. Trenton leaned back in his seat, his gray eyes sparkling. They were even old at the time of King Arthur. Legend has it that men used those woods as a crossing into another realm, one of fairies and magic, just brimming over with adventures. He smiled. Go on out to them, lad. Catch yourself a fairy. Will stared at his only living relative through assessing eyes. Trenton was 94, but from the way he looked and acted, no one would know it. He looked 70 and moved like he was 50. He'd once told Will that he gave England's countryside the credit for his good health, but he had winked, which made Will think otherwise. Trenton was watching Will expectantly again, so he said, It's raining, Grandpa. Now where's your sense of adventure? Trenton glanced out at the trees. Will, those trees don't call very often. When they do, you need to answer. Otherwise, you miss your opportunity. Opportunity for what? The stormy eyes that Will had inherited turned toward him, and in his rich accent, Trenton replied, The opportunity for greatness, my boy. Greatness. In the woods. The old man chuckled. Why not? Use your imagination. Go out and fight a dragon. Will blinked, but when he didn't respond, Trenton said, All right then, stay inside. I'll just sit and keep you company. He grinned and adjusted his weight in his chair. I'll go out later, Grandpa. Then I'll just keep you company until you do, he repeated, his eyes sparkling. Will let his breath out in a rush. He knew Trenton wouldn't stop pestering him until he consented. Will glanced out the window once more, then stood. I'll go grab a sweatshirt. The rain seemed to be clearing up somewhat anyway, and he didn't need to stay out for too long. Good. His great-grandfather stood as well. Enjoy yourself, Will. Will nodded and headed towards the kitchen staircase leading back up to his room. Lad, he turned back to Trenton, don't feel like you need to hurry home if you wish to stay. Will furrowed his eyebrows, but only nodded. As he began his way up the stairs, he thought he heard Trenton whisper, Goodbye, lad. Catch yourself a fairy. Now we're on chapter 3. So that's the whole chapter 2. Well, part 1 and part 2. You're going to have to watch that. And there might even be a part 3, depending on if Instagram lets me post 13 minutes as opposed to just 10. So, we'll find out. Hope you liked it.